I was cut at the age of 7, and to give you a background to my childhood, I grew up between Saudi Arabia and Italy, so I was considered a diaspora child when I came back to Somalia to go to school there. And it was me, my sister, my cousin. It was I came from a very privileged family, so we had a doctor to do it. But me and my sister actually didn't know, where you will find a lot of cases, girls know when this is going to happen. Because we were diaspora girls, we weren't told what was going to happen. And I was only told by my neighbour's daughter, actually, who told me about it.
Really?
Yes, she said, oh, you must be really looking forward to this day. And I remember saying to her, it's not my birthday. It's not, because my mother used to throw these very big, elaborate birthday parties. And I can see something's happening in the house, but I really didn't think it will be anything.
So you could see a celebration was being
Yeah, well, I
you.
woke up that morning, people were cooking, my mum had her usual caterers in the house, and I remember thinking, it's not my birthday, Dad's not in town, what the hell is going on, and I can see aunties around the house, but no one was saying anything. It was only until I heard my sister screaming around the other side of the house that I knew something horrible was happening. And by the time, it was like an out-of-body experience, so by the time somebody even said anything to me, it was, get Leyla now. And all I remember was I just started running around the house. I literally started to run. But I'm 7, so you can only run for so much.
So here you are, 8 years old. 7 years old. When did you realize that what was done to you was questionable?
For me, it actually didn't happen till my daughter was born.
Really?
Yeah.
So how old were you at that point?
I was 21 when I had her, because I went, I think what's important to understand what happened to me as a child. So my mum made everybody think we had type 3 because that's what her family practiced. This is like the worst severe type. But she paid the cutter extra money. So we had the less severe type physically. So this was like a big secret in our family. And we were not allowed to talk about it ever again. You just don't bring it up. It was only when I had my daughter, it was a health professional that brought it up with me and said, so how was your pregnancy? And I said, oh, it was horrible, it was a nightmare. I hated it. I said it was the pregnancy I really hated the most. Right. I said I just didn't like it. And she goes, what was the giving birth like? And I said, oh, it was horrible, but I said the bit I hated the most was anytime I was vaginally examined, because I said I was passing out. That I hated more than the actual giving birth. And she said to me, I'm looking at your notes. Can I, Miss Hussein, can I just check? I know you, so the way she asked was really important to me. She goes, can I just check whether you've undergone this practice? My response, literally shocks me now, even as I think about it. I said, oh no, I said, I've been through it, but I didn't have the worst type. So I had no problem urinating or having sex or any of that stuff. To me, it was not a big issue. And she said, well, it is, because she goes, from what you described, it seemed like your body was having flashbacks.
Wow.
So every time, because I was cut by a doctor, so any time a doctor came at me with any metal instruments, I would go back being that child again. And to me, that made so much sense.
The trauma.
The trauma constantly kept coming back. And for me, really, I've always said my work really started from wanting to protect my child from this. That's all I wanted, but it became a 16 years later, we're here. So for me, that's when this conversation really started for me. It was wanting to make sure my daughter doesn't undergo, because it was the moment I realized, oh my God, and the word she used was abuse. She didn't use the word cultural practice.
She used abuse?
She used the word abuse. She goes, what you've experienced, it's what we would call, she goes, what I would call child abuse, because the UK government was not calling it child abuse at the time.
So basically, you mentioned that families, the people around you are the ones pinning you down, and you want to sort of teach your daughter something different. What did it feel like knowing that your aunties, your mom are, putting you through this particular practice? Yeah,
people always say to me, oh, this is something that women do to other women. I think what people need to understand, the reason women are in that position, if they don't do it, they'll be ostracized for it. They're not the good wives, they won't be the good aunties. So we need to understand they live under a patriarchal system controlled by men. So the idea, if they don't do that, then they become the terrible moms, the terrible women. But also, coming from a clinical side in my head, there is this idea of if you admit this is wrong, then you're gonna have to do something about it. I think women continue because they need to make it okay for themselves because they've been through it themselves. So there's it's easy to blame these women, but what people need to understand, there's a whole environment that will blame them even more if they don't do it. I think there has to be an understanding. It's not right, but we need to understand. For me, I've had conversations with men who would say to me, well, she did it. And I said, but you paid for it. It was your finances that paid for it. You knew it was happening. So somehow that day, and I think men try to always get out of this conversation. I go, you know, you picked your daughter's name, you know, you'll pick the school she goes to. You might even pick who she gets married to. But that day, inconveniently, you were not available. So there is this sense,
Right.
we can let the women take the bait for this one, even though it's financed
Right.
by the men. So we need that's what happens, you know. Okay, it's easy to blame the women, but that's not the reality of it.
That's not the reality.
No.
And, you know, flash forward to a couple of years later now, how would you say it still affects you?
It affects me every day, obviously, because I work in the field. You know, as a therapist, I'm hearing women tell me their stories every day, so I'm in it every single day. The counsellors that I work with are sending me the assessments. I see it, I'm reading about it. So it affects me to where I do something good with the anger, I guess.
Right.
I'm constantly angry about it. I guess that's how it still affects me, because what shocks me till now, that we're not as outraged as we should be. Because if we were cutting children's fingers, there'll be an outrage, absolutely. But because what people need to understand, the reason people are not outraged about FGM the way we should be, it's because the idea of controlling the body of women's bodies and their sexuality, it's the norm globally. That's why no one's outraged about it. So for me, the way it affects me all the time, it's that needs to change. So my anger is not towards the community that practices FGM.
Right.
It's the system that should be protecting children from this is not doing its job. I think what that system usually, and I'm talking about England, you know, that's where I live. In the UK, even 2 days ago, they made an announcement in our education system. They'll be teaching sex and healthy relationships, and obviously teaching about other forms of abuses, but they're not going to teach FGM in there. Why is that any different? So that's the kind of outrage I carry with me all the time at work. And it's the outrage that we need. We do need to be outraged. I always say to people, if you're not outraged, then you're not doing this properly.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how it affects me on a daily basis. But in terms of my personal life, I'm somebody who, and I will encourage to anyone who's watching this, therapy is absolutely what saved my life. Hence why I became one. You know, it's important to have safe spaces where we can talk about this, because, you know, there's shame involved, guilt, but we need to start creating safe spaces where we do talk about this issue. So I guess personally that's how I deal with it, but publicly it's using that anger to actually, you know, for
Bring
me,
some change.
absolutely, we need to make changes, and we have to be absolutely outraged.